One of the biggest challenges for any republic, and namely the United States of America, is honoring the will of the majority, but also protecting the rights of the minority. So, this is a issue that people who have studied government now and hundreds, thousands of years ago would have wrestled with. Because, in one sense, you want to honor what most of the people want to do. But what if most of the people want to do something that we all know is wrong? Or at that moment they think is right, but they're not seeing it from the perspective of a smaller group of people in the society. And this issue has really been one of the big ones that America has had to wrestle with over the last few hundred years. So the majority versus the minority in American society. So this is not just about the way people look. Okay, when we think of majority and minority, we sometimes tend to think of race or ethnicity, but this can be a variety of things, religious beliefs. It could just be a certain economic group. It could be a variety of different subsegments when we start talking about a minority group in America. Majority is probably a little easier for us to understand, but remember that's just basically one more than half. So when we start thinking of what a majority is. So the question should be really for you to think about in this government class, and maybe all through life, is in a republic, should the will of the majority always prevail? All right, because this, hopefully, video that you're watching now will maybe haunt you in a good way, meaning that you'll wrestle with this idea quite a bit. And if you can figure it out, great. But most people, most great thinkers have just continue to chase their tail on this. Okay, so the will of the majority. It's easy for us to say yes. In living in America, democracy rules, right? That's what a democracy is. And remember, technically, America is a republic, democratic republic. A pure democracy would be when everybody votes on everything. We don't have that system, right? We vote for people to go vote for us, to represent us. And that's called a republic. But should the will of the majority always prevail? Well, it seems, if you think about it quickly, that you would say yes, because if the majority of the people in the nation or in a state or in a city want something, and it's clear that they want that, they voted yes or no, then it seems that the will of the majority should prevail. That seems like what a republic is all about. But oftentimes, throughout history, we've seen, especially where perhaps people think a certain way, and if they were to actually vote on it, and when they did vote on it, they would continue to do things that would violate and trample the rights of minorities. I mean, the clearest example would be slavery, right? So if we took the idea of slavery and we asked people in, say, Alabama to vote on whether or not they should have slavery, well, you might get a majority of people in Alabama saying, yes, we want to have slavery. So do you honor the will of the majority? And if you take that same prospect and you move it forward 100 years in the 1940s and 1950s, you might have a vote in Alabama about whether or not people of color and white people should be segregated, and there should be a special restaurant area for people of color and a special school for people of color and drinking fountains and bus stations. So if you let the people vote on things, sometimes the people get it wrong. Now, it's very difficult, obviously, to talk about right and wrong, but I would say most civilized people on planet Earth today, slavery, segregation, wrong. So you can't just let people vote on things and assume that because the majority of the people want it, that it's the right thing to do. But you also have to respect, in some ways, the will of the majority. So this is more than just a race issue, though, right? So if you think about religion, the majority of the people in the United States would identify themselves as Christians in some form or another. Do we allow them to vote to outlaw other religions because those religions are minority religions and they don't want them in our society. So it's a complicated issue. But generally, hopefully, at this point, you know that a couple main points, and these are the main points of this talk. One, in America today, the general rule would be the will of the majority is usually done. So if they are voting on something in the state of Vermont and the will of the majority is that they have a tax or that they vote for a governor or whatever, then it generally happens. But at the same time, the minority groups in the country would also be protected. So the will of the majority can't pass laws that go to harm or punish minority groups. And again, not just skin color or race or religion, but it could be anything. You don't want, if the majority of the people in the country use PC computers, they could vote to outlaw, say, Apple or Macintosh type computers or phones. So this really is about majority minority, and we want to have, obviously, in a civilized society, you'll have both. There will be a majority, people think a certain way, and on some issues, and then there'll be minority groups. But here's the thing. When we think about big social government issues, we know that the U.S. Constitution protects minorities. All right, so sure, the majority can rule, and they do rule. However, the majority can't, in their efforts to rule, they cannot seek to harm or destroy or undermine or outcast a minority group. The Constitution protects minorities, right? So if we're talking about voting or participation in voting, like poll taxes or paying, showing that you have to be able to read or write, literacy test, things like that to vote, those were designed, states did those things to kind of keep minority groups from participating. So there are lots of parts of the Constitution that protect minorities. All right, so the rule is, yes, the will of the majority generally gets what it wants. But at the same time, those who disagree with the majority can't be thrown in prison or treated harshly. The Constitution protects all of our citizens and will be treated equally. But here's the thing that you really should wrestle with, right? Because we are just people. And this government system that we have, this plan of government called the Constitution, it does protect minorities, but it too can be changed by a supermajority. All right, so we could take any example. If Christians were super organized all across the country as a majority and somehow were able to change the Constitution to say that Christianity is the only religion, or maybe more likely, Christianity is the official religion of the United States, the way that it is in other countries, say Great Britain has an official religion, right, the Church of England. So the Constitution could be changed by 2/3 of the House of Representatives, 2/3 of the Senate, and 3/4 of the states. So that's a supermajority, and then therefore would move to kind of hamper minority groups. But generally, most reasonable people today would not go for a plan of government that isolated and harmed minority groups. But it's possible. But generally, the way that America operates is majority and minority do this delicate dance, because at one moment it might be a majority, and then as population shifts or thinking changes, majority could become a minority on certain issues. So the general rule is, yes, we protect majority. The majority gets what it wants. But at the same time, we watch over our minorities, because they too are citizens and should be treated equally, whatever this minority group might be. Could be cultural, could be religious, could be ethnic. But in the end, what's really a challenge to think about is that the Constitution could be changed by supermajorities to kind of make it harder for minorities to exist. I don't think it would, But most Americans today tend to be reasonable and agree that majority-minority is a system that has always been and needs to be protected. So if we think about just some hot button issues in America today, whether we're talking about freedom of press or religion, free speech, or the right to educate how you want, I mean, there's always going to be those groups that just don't fit in as well as the majority group. So there are going to be small little segments of people and people groups, but they are protected by the Constitution until that Constitution is changed, which it's really, really difficult to change the Constitution. So most of America today is pretty happy with the majority rule, but limits on that majority. In other words, even if the people vote on something, it can't go against the Constitution, right? Clear example of this would be maybe the state of Oregon would create a law that says, only the women can vote because women technically are a majority in America today. Well, that would never hold up. The Supreme Court would say that law is unconstitutional because it doesn't treat everyone equally. Men should be able to vote. So even though men in this case, I think, are a minority slightly in America, they would act in a way to make sure that all groups, majority and minorities, are honored and protected. So one of the great strengths of America, of course, is this idea that out of many we have one. E pluribus unum is what it is in Latin. So everyone knew from the very beginning that America would be made up of a diverse group. And while you might be in the majority on one issue, you might be in a minority on another issue. It just depends. Remember, it's not just race or ethnicity. It could be lots of things. So, as a general rule, majority rules. But those rules that are passed, or those laws that are passed, can't hurt minorities. And the Constitution generally protects those minorities. But in the end, the Constitution could be changed if enough people in the Congress, there's people who just are voted in by other people, right? So if basically the will of the people, if enough people have become so popular to change the Constitution, then it is possible, theoretically, for minorities to lose ground. But as it stands now, majority-minority is this delicate dance, and it's all done within the framework of the Constitution.